Hi, Mary. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today about your book, Fuzz, When Nature Breaks the Law. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So I'd like to start by having you tell our audience just a little bit about your background and what led you to become a humorous science writer.
uh, well, my background is that I have no official training in what it is that I've ended up doing. I was a liberal arts major in college, which of course prepared me for nothing, nothing that pays. And I just started out doing copy editing. Not very well, I will add. I'm not very detail oriented. But I got involved in writing through that, through editing, and I realized it would be more fun to write things than to try to clean up other people's writing. So I started freelance writing. I did some public affairs work at the San Francisco Zoological Society out at the zoo, which was a kind of a fun job, and eventually, I combined, my job at the zoo with half-time freelance writing, and then the writing kind of took over, and I did magazine work for many, many years, thinking that books were something that other people could do and not me, and
Mhm.
finally, with an agent's encouragement, I, wrote a book proposal. That was back in around, 2000, and I've been writing books, ever since.
Oh, wow. So, what in particular inspired you to write Fuzz, a book about human wildlife conflicts?
Well, it's kind of a roundabout story. I wish I had a good origin story, like I was attacked by coyotes or so. Not that coyotes attack people, but I don't really have a scintillating origin story. It's something that I stumbled onto. When I finish one book, I'm always looking around for another and just turning over stones and going, well, what about this? What about that? And I got interested in work being done at the National Wildlife Forensics Lab up in
Mhm.
Ashland, Oregon, and because forensics is an area I find kind of fascinating, and I thought, well, maybe that's something. And I went up there and I interviewed this woman, Bonnie Yates, who does all kinds of work with. She started a hair library, because of course, when materials come into this country, whether it's a pelt or a body part. They need to figure out, is this an endangered species or not? And so she has this amazing collection of like five different types of hair from every species, and that kind of thing fascinated me. So I went up to talk to her and thought, well, maybe something in this area. But as it turns out, I wouldn't be allowed to tag along on any open investigations. That's the director is like, just legally, no, you can't do that. And that's a deal breaker for me because I really want to be on the scene where people are doing their jobs and doing their work. So I kind of flipped it inside out. Instead of animals as the victims and humans as the perpetrators, I thought, well, what if animals were the perpetrators and people were the victims? And this is, of course, speaking loosely. Obviously, animals are following their instincts. They don't follow the law, but they do go out and break all the laws that we have, whether it's manslaughter or trespassing or littering. They do it all, and we have to figure out, well, what do you do? You can't sort of throw the book at them. You can't write them a fine. You have to resolve these conflicts another way, and science seems to be the way to do that. And I love when I stumble onto some little corner of science that I didn't know existed, and human wildlife conflict is one of those corners. I didn't realize all the work that goes on resolving these conflicts and issues, and I thought, well, that maybe that would be an interesting book to pursue, and made a few inquiries here and there. And one of the places I started was the National Wildlife Research Center, and I believe they led me to the wildlife fertility chapter, to some of the work that is done in that area. So that's kind of how it happened.
Right. So I'm glad you mentioned that because obviously we're the Botstiber Institute for Wildlife Fertility Control, and one of our core missions is educating public policymakers, wildlife managers on the role that wildlife fertility control can play in human wildlife conflict mitigation. So, all right, wildlife fertility control. Be honest. I'm sure our audience would love to know what, if anything, you knew about it before writing this book.
I had reported a story years ago for Discover magazine about a project in Australia on, I think it was Snake Island, I want to say, and it's an island. So obviously a limited, finite amount of resources there, and they have a koala overpopulation problem because the koalas are essentially it's not so much a human conflict as a koala koala conflict because they're eating all the eucalyptus, and that's the only thing they can eat, and so they're going to starve. So there was an effort underway to believe that was something implantable that they were this was many years ago in the early 90s, I think. But so I was introduced at that point to the complexities and sometimes humorous challenges of trying to have animals on a birth control regimen. They first of all, they had to get the koalas out of the trees, and that they used this long, long telescoping pole with a black plastic garbage bag that they shook, which scared the koalas, and the koalas would come out of the tree, and then somebody would shoot them with a tranquilizer, and then they would I believe it I'm trying to remember, I think it was an implantable device. Anyway, that was all and all well, no, I should say that's not all. I know here in the Bay Area I used to work briefly at the SPCA Public Affairs Office, and there was an effort to use birth control on deer on Angel Island. Again,
Oh, okay.
an island population, so a little bit easier to figure out, who's had the first dose,
Right.
which animals need the second dose, etc. Um, and I don't know what the upshot of that project was. I don't
Mhm.
think it went very well. This was a long time ago. This was probably in the '80s, and I don't know, yeah, I don't know whatever happened with that population of deer,
Right.
but those were the 2 projects, wildlife birth control projects I was familiar with, and then, many years went by until I started this book, and, checked back in with what's going on.
Right. Yeah, you actually devoted an entire chapter of your book, The Monkey Fix, to wildlife fertility control and the role it could play in mitigating these human wildlife conflicts. So, above and beyond your previous experience with this issue, was there another reason why you decided to devote a whole chapter of the book to this particular method and the many different like species and contexts it's being used in around the world? I know you focused a lot of the chapter of that book on issues in India, but of course, it's being used in a lot of different countries for a lot of species and contexts.
Yeah, I definitely I knew from the start that that's something I would want to cover because it's humane, it's appealing to the population. It seems you talk about culling a population. I mean that's if it's done right with people who are good sharpshooters, it is a humane method, but it doesn't sit well with a lot of people, a lot of members of the public. It seems cruel. So birth control, I think it has a broader appeal, and it seems that there's not really a lot of downside to trying to control a population with birth control. So I knew I wanted to include that, and also I thought the science was fascinating. The different ways to go about it. Are you preventing uh, um, conception, or are you doing something with the hormones to sort of put an animal into kind of a, I don't want to say menopause, but a suspended hormonal state? How do you go about it, and the challenges of figuring out, if a booster is needed, how do you keep track of who needs it and who's had the first shot, and it just struck me as a fertile a fertile ground.
No pun intended,
No
right?
pun intended, yeah, as a fertile area to get into for the book. So there was never any question in my mind that about including fertility control. Yeah.
So there's another chapter of your book, and you talk about the potential use of gene editing as a non-lethal and non-surgical approach to managing free-roaming domestic and wild animal populations. The disappearing mouse chapter of your book focuses on it. So a lot of people consider this a an emerging method of wildlife or free roaming animal fertility control that really is in its infancy. Why did you include a chapter about it in your book?
Well, like you said, it's really kind of the future of animal birth control, wild animals or feral animal birth control. So it seemed it would be remiss to not include that because that's where a lot of work's being done and a lot of projects under consideration, in particular for these island populations where you will probably have number one, they're trying to control species that are decimating the populations of native wildlife, which is a little more appealing use for the public. And they also, because an island is isolated for the most part, there's allays a little of the fears that people have about genetic strategies. People are a little uncomfortable. What does that mean? Does that mean, all mice are going to now? What if they get out, etc.? So
Right.
I focused the chapter on National Wildlife Research Center, where one of the things they're figuring out is how do we create a habitat that is escape proof. So if we're going to do this
Right.
work, we need this habitat that they will not get out of. And they had like one escape, which it was kind of like Escape from Alcatraz. It was this mouse that was in the bedding when they swept up the bedding to change the bedding. He sort of hid. It's like
Mhm.
hitting and hiding in the laundry basket at
Right.
at Alcatraz, and so an island situation I think is a little more comfortable for the general public. But anyway, the reason I included it is that I think it would be remiss not to in a book about the science of human wildlife conflict, and it's a lot of work going on in that area and a lot of conversation about how the how do we make the public comfortable? How do we make ourselves comfortable? What pace do we go at that seems cautious? Because it's always those unknown unknowns that end up tripping people up, particularly, with wildlife control. People have good intent and then something happens, and then suddenly you have, the cane toad scenario or the mongoose in Hawaii. I mean, there's things don't always go as planned. So I think with something like Gene Drive, it's wise to proceed cautiously.
I would say that for people that have not read your book yet, of course, I highly recommend that they do. This is it. This is what it looks like when you see it in your local bookstore. That you did a really good job of sort of anticipating questions that your readers would have about this emerging field and the concerns that they would have about it being misused in some way or
Yeah,
it being used in the wrong context and the unintended consequences that have occurred, and then pointing out it's these unintended consequences that are prompting the development of this new tool, and we don't want that to have unintended consequences, right? So I just thought you did a really good job with the
oh,
chapter of sort of
thank you.
helping
Yeah,
guide readers on what people are thinking and concerns that people that are working in this field are having, as well as people that are just starting to learn about it, like me.
sure.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so, was there one experience while writing the book that is the most memorable for you? And if so, would you like to share it with us?
Oh, one experience that was most memorable. Well, I will always remember being mugged by a
That's
macaque
a good one. Yes, that was a good one.
in India.
You
Um,
were brave. Having you describe that to the reader, I'm not sure I would have done that. I'm just for the sake of the book. I wow.
I
Um,
tend to throw myself into things with great enthusiasm until I get to that moment where it's happening, and then I think, "Oh, what was what was I thinking?" But this one, I mean, it was a little, well, I'll say I was, there was a trail up this was a town a small city called Bundi in Jaipur, India, and there's an old fort up on the hill, and there's a long trail through the brush to go up there, and, there are macaques and also some langurs that you can just see them running around at dusk up on the ruins, and there's a lot of them up there, and people tell you, "Be careful if you go up there, carry a stick." Well, I didn't carry a stick, I carried a plastic bag full of bananas. I was asking for it. It was like leaving your laptop in the back seat of a car in a, bad neighborhood. So, I kinda knew what might be coming, and, but it was amazing to me how fast they were and how clever. I mean, I don't know that these 2 macaques were working as a team. They might have just been competing with
I
each other, but,
don't know.
uh
Now you described it seemed pretty compelling that they're it was a conspiracy there. So
It was like
um,
there was the one that kinda, like, you're coming along the trails when I was coming back down, and I see this little head pop up from behind a rock. I'm like, "Uh-oh," and that macaque steps out into the trails, kinda like the bandits waiting for the stagecoach, and I'm focused on this macaque, and we're about 2 feet away, and I'm staring at her or him and thinking, "Is it," and I'm not holding the bag out. It was not my intent to feed these guys. It was just, let me see if they'll mug me. I'm not sure I'm not sure what they'll do. So I'm standing there holding my bag, staring at this one macaque, and then so fast, lightning fast, this other one that I hadn't seen comes up from behind, grabs the bag and takes off. So,
well, I will
yeah.
say when I was reading it, it reminded me of the scene in Jurassic Park where the big game hunter finds out how intelligent the velociraptors are because they do the sort of a bait and switch where
Yes.
one gets his attention and the other one was standing right beside him all the time. But
Yeah.
they didn't just take a banana, they killed him. You
Oh,
know?
yeah, and they'll do
So,
this thing where they, in the urban areas, they'll ransom uh, like personal objects like a phone. They know what people care about. They'll take a phone, they'll take sunglasses,
wow,
they'll take a mostly it's like sunglasses and phone, and they'll just grab it, and then they know, and people know if you hold out a piece of fruit or a candy
that
bar,
is
they'll drop
absolutely
what they took
amazing.
and take the food. So they're
That
basically
is
ransom
absolutely
whole.
amazing that they
Yeah,
know what a high value
yeah,
product
yeah.
looks like to us. They
I heard
must be so amazed that it's not food for us too, right? It's not food for us, and they
right.
have learned that it's not food, which kind of tells
Exactly.
us
They
something
even
about us
took there
that's
was
not.
this one woman, and I don't think the monkeys knew what this thing was, but they stole her asthma inhaler and then
Oh
ransomed
my,
it. I know. I think
oh
they
my
just thought,
God,
"Oh, it's a cell," she's holding it in her hand, it must be important. I don't know, something like that. But they're,
that's fascinating.
and they had this one woman told a story about these macaques that went into this, hospital in Delhi, New Delhi, actually would pull if it was an IV with, like a sugar solution, they pull an IV out and suck on the sugar one.
Oh wow.
Yeah, they
Mm.
had figured out that the liquid in that bag was sweet, and they, this I did not witness this. This was told to me by a woman who had either heard it or seen it anyway. Yeah.
Well, as intelligent as they are, it doesn't definitely, suggests that attempting to do any form of fertility control is going to be challenging, not insurmountable, but certainly a challenge for anyone that tries to do it with primates.
Yes.
But there is a need in places like India and
Yep.
Africa. There are communities that are working with researchers to try and figure out ways to incorporate fertility control into their integrated
Yep.
approaches, which also includes not intentionally feeding these animals and then
Right.
finding ways to
Yep.
not unintentionally feed them as well.
Yeah, exactly. And India is a challenge because of the um, religious feelings that people have for monkeys because of the representation of Hanuman as a monkey. So they have this real sense of like they don't want these animals captured, harmed, messed with in any way, even to the point where some people object to sterilization techniques. But it's not fair to the people charged with this with resolving this problem. Are dealing with a population who are insistent that the monkey problem be resolved. They don't want these monkeys around. They don't want them to be messing with their lives, but on the other hand, they don't want anybody to touch them, to harm them. So it's a very delicate balance in a culture
I'm
like that, where people
I'm
both
glad.
love and hate them.
I'm really glad you brought up the human dimensions aspect of this because that's ultimately what's driving a lot of innovations in non-lethal, humane
Yep,
approaches to resolving conflicts with wildlife. And it's
yep,
one of the reasons your book really resonated with the Botstiber Institute for Wildlife Fertility Control is that the message you seem to want to convey at the end of the book, after you've relayed all of the experiences you had with all of the professionals and the people that are members of the public that are dealing with these conflicts, is this call for compassionate coexistence. Is that
Yeah.
correct? And
Oh, yeah.
if so,
Yeah.
could you talk a little bit about that? And if not,
Sure.
what message were you hoping
Yeah.
for readers to take away from
No,
the book?
that's very much the message that I would hope to impart. In particular, with some of these animals that we refer to as pests. I think the word pest has given people a little kind of a pass to not really think about them in terms of sentient beings, and yeah, they're creatures, not unlike your dog. This is a creature that um, if possible, let's not cause pain or distress. Even if it's a small bird or a rodent, is there a way we could do that? That's if we and if possible, let before we even get around to how could you get rid of this animal? Let's talk about what if you just try to keep it out of your home? What if you try to practice exclusion? What if you just try to think of it differently? Like maybe it's kind of wonderful to have in your backyard traipsing through, like in my backyard, raccoons, possums, skunks. I don't know, they don't bother me. We don't have any spaces for them to get in and to do anything that's bothersome. So that's a place to start, is just sort of letting them be and keeping them out of the places that you don't want them. But then of course there's other situations where um, the population is too large for the environment, that even to the point where it's going to be harmful for them. They're going to starve, say in the case of deer, where there's just not enough, or they're coming, starting to raid people's gardens and things. So right, can we think about ways to cope with this problem that are compassionate? And that's something that I think when you're dealing with an animal that you call it a pest, you don't you necessarily, a lot of people in the public aren't used to really thinking about that as, um, s- they're like, It's a pest. You call the exterminator." That's just what you do. That's been kind of the mindset for a long time. And so I think it's great that I wanted to encourage people just to think about it a bit before they go online and find an exterminator. Just kind of, there's other ways to there's ways to prevent these conflicts in the first place, and there's also humane ways to deal with it. And that that's a win-win, I think. I mean, I think people welcome those options. I think that, when you can make them aware of it. I included a section at the back of the book, which is resources for people dealing with different species. They're getting up in their business and they don't want them there. It's like, well, let's start here. What could you do to change the structure of your house so that that keeps those raccoons out, or squirrels, or whatever it is? And who can you call if you need professional help? There are wildlife control operators who specialize in compassionate and humane techniques. And then on a government level, is there a humane option? And that's when that brings us to fertility control. Yeah,
Right. Right. Well,
yeah.
thank you for your time today. This has been great. I wanted to ask again, when the paperback of your book Fuzz comes out.
It comes out the end of this month, August, I think yeah, I think it's August 30th, and it's looks like this. The paperback. Thank you very
Okay,
much. Uh, Yeah, so it's coming out soon, and yeah, it's been great to chat with you, and thank you so much for having me on.
we can't wait to hear about your next book. We won't, yeah, we won't ask for
It's
any further
underway.
details.
It's in
I'm
the
sure it
chaos
is.
phase of where I'm like, "What's this a book about?" It's kinda like branching out all over the place like a weird amoeba, but at some point I'll rein it in and it'll be a book. A cover will be slapped on it and it will be a book.
If it's anything like Fuzz and any of your previous books, we know it'll be great, and we'll be looking forward to seeing it come out in the not too distant future, we hope. And good luck with the issuance of the paperback.
Thank you so much. Thanks, it was great to chat.